I'm hitting the record button right now. So we're live, and I'll just take that as a disclaimer that if your video is still on right now, then you understand that this is going to be played on YouTube, and you're consenting to that. And if you would not like that, then you can turn off your video right now. Okay, well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight. This is a series that we're calling Nature Calls that I've been running weekly through the winter and into the spring here. We've been having a ton of fun bringing on guests from really all over the map to dive into topics of nature connection and connection to the land, things like food security and sustainability, things like self-reliance skills, as well as stewardship. And stewardship can mean both stewardship of the land as well as stewardship with our relations, stewardship with other people. So those have been kind of the overarching themes of this series. And each week I've been bringing on a guest to kind of share some insights and hopefully share some practical takeaways that you can bring home with you in your week. We also created this series because of the pandemic as an opportunity for people just to connect with other like-minded people, take their mind off of some of the weight of the world, and kind of have a lighthearted conversation, as well as grow their self-reliance skills. And I think this past year is really showing us how important kind of like small scale, local grassroots self-reliance really is. That's something I'm definitely a big proponent of. My name is Chris Gilmore, for those that don't know me. I suspect quite a few people on here do at this point, but I live over in Ontario with my amazing wife, Laura, where we have a little permaculture-inspired homestead and herb farm, and we tend the wilds there. I'm a long-term outdoor educator and naturalist mentor, so mentoring people in things like wildlife tracking and bird language and backcountry survival and all kinds of things of that nature. So if you want to learn more about what I do, you can go and check out my website. It's chrisoutdoors.ca, and you can learn a little bit more about myself. And let's see, our game plan for tonight. I'll just do a really quick overview and then we'll dive in. So the game plan for tonight, we always start off with a little opening. And I really like this piece. You know, I kind of feel it's the part that really connects us together in a powerful way when we're meeting virtually. It allows us to remember that we're still a part of nature as we sit in front of these screens. It connects us to gratitude. And yeah, it just reminds us of what's truly important in life, helps us kind of brush off the busyness and the stress of the day. So I'm going to actually pass it over to Brandy in a couple moments here to actually do our opening tonight and kind of bring our minds all together in a good way. From there, we're going to kind of break the rest of the call into two segments. The first segment is the nature awareness segment. So I'm going to have a little bit of a check-in, just kind of what I'm paying attention to out in nature right now and what I'm up to and what's capturing my curiosity. And I'm going to invite Brandy to do the same. And then after that, we're going to split into the breakout groups, and you'll have an opportunity to connect with people potentially all over the world and kind of share what's going on in your neighborhood right now. What are you paying attention? What are the birds doing? What are the trees doing? What's the water doing? What are the stars doing? What are you doing in your garden right now? And it's a really fun kind of insightful place to just to kind of track the greater landscape, the greater village and what people are up to. We'll come back from that. We'll take a little bit of a small break. And then we're going to finish off with a kind of a deep dive with Brandy, where we're going to dive into some fascinating conversations. I didn't even really know what to call tonight's call because Brandy brings such a wealth of experience and knowledge. But there'll be some kind of overarching themes around permaculture and regenerative living and this idea of like living reconciliation. So not just acknowledging it, but what does it look like to actually live it with our actions? And then a topic that Brandy's incredibly passionate about, which is community building and what she often refers to as revillaging. So that'll be the topic that we're diving into in the second half of the night. I also just want to introduce one person here tonight. Maybe you can wave, Sherry Ann. I don't know if people see her or not there, but Sherry Ann has been our amazing moderator for these series. She's a wonderful person, and she runs Blue Jay Botanicals. So if you're interested in beautiful, small batch, handcrafted herbal goods, plant inspired, then check out Blue Jay Botanicals. And Sherry Ann also runs a podcast called the Ignite Your Wild podcast. And Sherry Ann, maybe you could throw the links for your podcast and your Instagram down in the chat there if people want to check those out. And just so folks know, throughout the night, if myself or Brandy reference resources, then Sherry Ann's going to actually be throwing the links in the chat. She'll just be kind of following along. So if you hear us reference a program or a resource or a book or whatever, Sherry Ann will do her best to capture that. So just watch the chat for messages from Sherry Ann that might be from us. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to you, Brandy, and welcome you. I'll do a formal introduction to Brandy afterwards, but I'd love to actually do our opening before we go much deeper with that. So if you feel good about it, Brandy, I'd love to pass it over to you right now.
That sounds great. Can you hear me well enough?
I can. The audio is great.
Good. Superb. I just really want to say I'm grateful to be with you all and so many people on the call. So I would imagine a great way to start is to land in here together, land in wherever you are, each on our own lands and territories where we each reside. My deep need whenever I come together with a group of people is just to feel the weave of many of us. So placemaking, place-based learning kind of starts with inside for me. And I'd like to invite us to close our eyes if you're comfortable. If not so much, then maybe even find a way to see outside at a tree or some larger expanse than just our own mind, and we can leave that cranial cavity behind. So if we close our eyes, it's like to invite us to listen to our breath. I've been wearing a mask for many hours, and I've been listening deeply to my breath as a meditation and a practice to just re-presence me in the midst of everything going on around, and me connected to the earth that I'm standing on. And then I'd like to invite us to go out a little bit from that us place and where we stand into the wider pictures of coming to our senses. And I mean that literally and metaphorically, but waking up and coming to our senses to all that's around us. And there's probably sounds that we each hear. There's probably even smells available. And in the inner landscape of my eyes closed, or maybe for some looking out the window, there is imaginings and things we think we're seeing, but information that's coming into us. And a fun thing for me is to actually taste this moment and to let myself kind of savor it and use that sense as well, to be fully aware of the ecosystem that I am part of. And I know I'm not alone. I know my sense of belonging, no matter what is going on in the world, is very complete. My interiority and then all else around me. And I invite us to kind of send that out in a radiant way of being, where we become an offering into the world, an opportunity for a heart connection, and an amazing opportunity to just feel our interbeingness, all beings, four-legged, feathered ones, maybe unseen realms, depending on how your mindscape likes to work, but just the full interbeingness of connection. And maybe just 3 deep breaths to bring us back into the space. And if your eyes are closed, just gently giving that soft yoga gaze to bring back to these weird little squares that we are nowadays. But you really not so weird, because in that slight yoga gaze, we can really still see each other. There's still an interconnection in our interbeing on the internet. And this might become something a little more natural. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for just breathing ourselves into a coherence. And again, I'm grateful to be with you. My name is Brandy Gallagher. I herald in from our eco-village on Vancouver Island and the traditional territories of the Cowichan, the Sook, and the Malahat nations. And our eco-village is literally the lands in between where the confluence and the intersection is. So no great mystery that 10,000 learners used to show up here per year in some way, shape, or form until this global pandemic. So I get a little time now to listen and be coming to my senses without a lot of talk around me. And I'm super grateful for that. Super grateful to be with you all. tonight as well. Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandy. That was beautiful to bring us. I wish I could quote it. What did you say? Like interconnect is inner. You had 3 eyes in a row that ended with the interweb. And I was like, oh, that was good. I like that. Cool. Well, maybe I'll do a little bit of just a bit more of an intro for Brandy. And if you'd like to add anything else, you can, Brandy. And then we'll kind of go into the first segment of the night, which is our nature awareness segment. And then the second part, we'll kind of dive into all those other topics. But I had the pleasure of meeting Brandy, I guess, about 2 years ago. At the time I was doing a lot of consulting around emergency and disaster management, ironically, right before this whole pandemic hit. And I was working with organizations and individuals and businesses, helping them kind of build resiliency into their model. And kind of my take on emergency preparedness is that nature is the ultimate model of resiliency. And can we take the best of kind of modern day emergency and disaster preparedness and bridge it with concepts like nature awareness and knowledge of place, and some of the places that Brandy is really tied into around regenerative living and permaculture and reconciliation and relationships between people and the healing of grief, and kind of bring those all together into a more holistic approach to emergency and disaster preparedness and designing for disasters. So Brandy had kind of heard about my work and reached out, and we ended up entering kind of into a contract over a period of time to do some work around some of these systems, filling in some of the holes out at our eco-village when it comes to emergency preparedness and response. Being on the West Coast, they've always got the kind of looming threat of a big earthquake in the background and the tsunami. And we had no idea that COVID-19 was right around the corner. And we did a bunch of work that probably fed really nicely into them being able to adapt to that scenario. But anyways, I traveled out there a couple of summers ago when I met Brandy, and I was just blown away by how beautiful the space was that they created. And the personality that Brandy was, I'd never met somebody quite like her before, and we just instantly connected. And it was just like really quickly, it went from a business relationship to just being really close friends. And we've stayed in touch ever since. Just to give you a quick little vision, when you walk around our eco village there's beautiful cob buildings, and they have goats and I don't even know, chickens and a whole bunch of other animals. There's beautiful gardens everywhere. They have gray water systems to treat their water. They have just so many things going on there. And I happened to show up when they were running a permaculture design course with one of our guests from the winter season, a lady named Starhawk and a gentleman named Charles Williams. They're from Earth Activist Training. So I got to connect with them, which was amazing because Starhawk was one of my early influences in the realm of permaculture and even, my philosophies on life. So yeah, that gives me, I can introduce Brandy just through my experience of first kind of meeting her and knowing that the space that she holds out there. I don't know, is there anything you want to kind of add to that introduction there, Brandy? I think people will get to know you a lot when we dive in, but feel free to share anything or correct me if I said anything that feels inaccurate to you.
I would just notice that probably the way I would describe me and or the space of our eco-village is that we are living permaculture. And so I have given my life over to the very complex but very simple design of resilient living that many people know as permaculture design. And perhaps you hear that from Chris or other people on these calls. If you haven't heard it before, please go find that. What the heck does that word mean? But to create a 25-acre demonstration site and education center fully founded within permaculture principles 22 years ago is something that is a bit unique in North America, because we did the craziest thing. We teamed up with the regulatory authorities and policymakers and places where other friends thought was terrifying, we decided to partner with. And so we're called the Lawful Permaculture Site.
Awesome. Well, maybe that'll be my first question after our break. And what does living permaculture actually mean? But let's come back to that one for folks that are new to that. So let's do segment 1 here, which is the nature awareness piece of the night. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to just kind of share a few things that are on my radar and that I'm holding in my awareness these days. And I'm going to pass it over to Brandy to do the same thing. And then we're going to split into breakout groups and you'll have a chance to connect with some of the community. And I love this activity, especially checking in with people all over the place, because it gives us this opportunity to just kind of track what's happening in nature across a larger span of this beautiful chunk of land that many of us call home. So what am I thinking about these days? Man, so much is going on in the spring. I think it was last call we were all together and somebody was mentioning the warblers down south had returned. I think they were down in the Toronto area. And if you don't know warblers, they're a very specialized type of bird species. They're often known for their beautiful colors and often they're incredible songs, but you rarely see them because they tend to inhabit the canopies versus trees like robins and chickadees that we see in our backyards and bird feeders. And I've been waiting for the warblers to return. We have most of our species back right now. And we haven't had any warblers yet. And I'm kind of suspecting the next big strong wind from the south, there's going to be a couple warblers coming in. And just yesterday, I was just a touch south of here, and I actually heard my first warbler of the year. And I couldn't actually remember whose call it was. I was like, oh man, I learned this bird last year, and I've already forgot his call. So I gotta remember some of my warbler calls. But I'm excited about the return of the warblers. So that's one thing that's on my mind right now. I know the wild turkeys are breeding right now because I've been hearing them gobble every morning and every evening. So that's really exciting. And I actually just bought this thing. I actually just watched a video on this the other week. I bought a barred owl call. For those of you that don't know the barred owl, it does this. I don't know if I can do it with my mouth. I should have brought the call down, but it's like this. Hoo, 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 hoo. That's probably a little too high pitch, but hoo, 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 kind of call. So I brought this barred owl call, and I had heard that the turkeys often will respond to barred owl calls. So I just started yesterday, but I've been trying to go out at sunrise and sunset and call with this call to see if I can get some of these male turkeys to call back with me. So I'm having a little bit of fun with that out in nature right now. One thing that's super excited for us, and I had mentioned the business that I run with my wife, Laura, Wild Muskoka, which is an ethically sourced and wild crafted foods business. Wild leek season is upon us, and that's a super exciting part of the time for us. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be harvesting a lot of wild leeks, and we turn them into fun things like wild leek vinegar, and we infuse them into spices. We also like to make wild leek soup just for ourselves. And on a stewardship note, the one thing I'll just mention with wild leeks, a lot of people know wild leeks for their bulbs, and the bulbs are delicious. They make great soups, but wild leeks have been incredibly over harvested in parts of the world in the last number of years. And a lot of people don't realize is that you can get a lot of the medicine and the flavor just out of the leaves without actually digging up the root and hurting the plant. So we harvest a handful of roots every year for ourselves. And when we're out there, we actually prep the ground so that the seeds of the patches we're in are more likely to actually take. And it's been really beautiful over, about 8-9 years of harvesting wild leeks. We've actually seen the patches grow in size instead of shrink as we've been harvesting them. But most of the time, what we do is we go and harvest one leaf because there's usually 2 to 3 leaves. So we'll take one leaf per plant, and not even every plant, like one leaf every 3 or 4 plants, which that way we're able to keep going back to those sites year after year. And then when we're there, we'll scrape up the leaves on the ground, which now exposes the soil, which makes a better seed bed for them, because often the seeds will land in the leaves and then they'll dry out if we have a dry stretch. Whereas if we can get them underneath right onto the soil and then come back and spread the leaves over, they're more likely to actually sprout and take. So that's on my mind right now. Those of you who might be wondering from last week, I've also been harvesting smelt all week, which are these tiny little non-native fish that swim up the creeks here and spawn in the springtime. And you go at like 11 o'clock at night with a net and a flashlight. It's really, really fun. And you can scoop them out of the water like between 12 and 20 at a time. So that's super exciting. I see Delphine on there. Yeah, I saw your pictures the other day. Delphine's been harvesting them too up near North Bay there. So we've been harvesting smelt. And one thing I love about harvesting them, as I said, they're not a native species to the lakes around here. So you can feel pretty good about harvesting them in pretty large numbers without having a negative impact. In fact, you may even be having a positive impact, it's probably argued. Although I think they're pretty habitualized and kind of here to stay right now. Oh, and I just saw Sherry Ann just put up a great video that we made on sustainable leek harvest, if that's something that interests you. So that's kind of what's on my mind right now around what's going on in the wild. And then, of course, there's all the stuff we're doing in the garden this time of year, which is super busy. We just started planting our cold hardy greens in the greenhouse, which is crazy because Brandy's probably already eating those on the West Coast and they've been growing for 2 months. But we're just starting to seed the greenhouse cold hardy plants. What's going on in your world out, Brandy? What are you noticing out in nature? What are you doing in the garden? What's catching your curiosity these days?
I don't know if you guys know, but we're having a heat wave here. And it might be the highest recorded temperature we've had in April coming on Saturday, like recorded. So we had all this effort and time put into planning, and things were frozen and frozen, and we had a long stretch of very like -1 to -3 even nights, and suddenly the heat just came on this week, and it's going up to 24 plus maybe on the weekend, which is fairly extreme for April, which means all of our food systems suddenly went into jeopardy because everything can bolt. All our babies that we've been trying to tend under lights and so forth can't handle this kind of heat. So this is a curious thing to be in the midst of. And at the same time, I'm super aware of this, like very domesticated, been inside a lot because it's the winter, been online a lot because that's what people are doing. But as everything outside wakes up, there's this wild and domestic part of me inside that is both and felt right now. And the funniest thing happened, but I was nursing a baby goat that was born and trying to keep it alive in the middle of the night. It almost died, and I curled up in front of the fire and held it on my skin to the warm fire and fell asleep for many hours until like 3 in the morning. And I kept nursing with a bottle this goat, and I brought it back to life. And then finally, middle of the night, I decided, okay, you're going back to your mom so you don't imprint on me too much. And I went in the darkest of no moon up to the barn and came back with my headlamp on, with another baby in my arms, and I'm half asleep, and I see these 2 green eyes staring me down. Well, I happen to know there's 2 mama cougars in the area with 2 babies, and they're coming in close. They're looking for whatever they can get, and everything's a little hungry right now until this week, but they're in barnyards and taking out livestock. And so at that time of night and half awake, I yell "Wah!" at the cougar, and our poor kitty cat goes running across the courtyard like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And I almost dropped the baby goat. But it was kind of this very funny moment in the middle of the night. My wild and my domestic met, and I had a goat, and I thought I had a cougar, and I was going to defend the goat. But that is kind of some of what's going on around here. There's the both and still as well.
Hey, beautiful. So what I'd like to do right now, we're going to split out into breakout groups for all those who choose to participate. And it's an opportunity just to have a conversation with the crew that we have on here tonight, a little bit of community time. And the question I'd just like to pose is kind of what's capturing your attention and your excitement and your passion in your part of the world right now. So what are you noticing out in nature? What are you doing in your garden? If you got mystery questions, I love it when people bring mystery questions into these, like, I heard this sound the other day, or I saw this thing, or I found this plant, and I'm wondering what it is. So if you got a mystery question that you want to bring into the group, that's kind of our theme right now. I'll just kind of share. So one, if you don't want to participate, that's fine. You can take, about a 10-minute break right now, because that's about how long we're going to be in there. And two, there's sometimes a few tech issues when I split everyone up with just not having even number of people in rooms, or every once in a while, someone ends up in a room by themselves because a bunch of other people don't join. So just know if you end up in a room by yourself or there's something weird going on, I am going to spend the next couple of minutes just trying to sort all of that out behind the scenes. So just kind of hang tight. You can always exit the room and come and chat with me in the chat box here too, and just let me know what's going on, and I can try and help you out if you're having tech issues. But with that said, I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. And the question was basically, kind of what's going on out in nature in your region right now? What's capturing your attention? What mystery questions do you have right now? And if something going on in your garden, that's great too. One other thing I just like to say, let's just make sure that we allow space for all voices there. I know some people like to talk more than other folks do. And sometimes if there's a quiet break and you've already shared a fair bit and there's people that haven't, maybe just let it be quiet for a moment or two, because maybe that person's just trying to get up the courage to share something there. So I just invite awareness of the other voices in your group and making sure that there's time allowed for everybody to speak. And just know that everybody's welcome here, regardless of your experience level, regardless of where you're coming from. Everybody is welcome to be here. And I just ask that we all be super respectful and acknowledge that. So with that said, I'm going to open up our breakout rooms right now. I hope folks enjoyed that segment. I didn't have time to actually pop into the room, so I don't really have a gauge of whether that was enough time or too much time. So if you want to share in the chat, or if you want to fire me email with any kind of feedback on doing those little breakout sessions, I would love. I've been playing around a little bit with the format of them and how we do them. So yeah, feel free to fire me some an email after the call if you want to share any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on the calls in general, and what we can do to make these the most kind of valuable and refreshing and useful for you. So it's worth showing up. So okay. So what I'm going to do for a moment right now, I'd like to take just an opportunity to share about some kind of upcoming opportunities. And I know Brandy has a few as well, although I might have her share at the end after you've had a little bit of an introduction to our work. And then we'll transition into kind of phase 2 or segment 2 of our night's call here. So this is a free call series that we do, and I'm really happy to do it. It's funny, I actually started this thinking I was just going to do a handful of them in the winter time, and the feedback was so great from the audience, and I enjoyed them myself so much that I said, you know what, let's just keep doing it. This is great. With that said, if you would like to support these calls continuing to be free and going out to the world and support the work that I'm doing, I'd like to mention a couple of ways that you can do that, as well as grow your own relationship and knowledge of the land, as well as grow your self-reliance. So there's 3 things I just want to mention really quickly right now. One of them is Wild Muskoka Botanicals. So if you go to www.wildmuskoka.com, that's the wild crafted food business that I was telling you about, food and drinks that my wife, Laura, runs. And she has a coupon. If you actually enter Nature Calls, literally all one word, Nature Calls, you'll get 10% off of anything from the Wild Muskoka store. She actually has a whole bunch of really cool workshops coming up there as well. We're actually running our first intro to permaculture and homesteading course this summer, which will be a live in-person class, as long as the COVID times allows us to do that. So that's exciting. But you can also grab amazing things like sustainably harvested wild leek vinegar and fun digestive and cocktail bitters and things of that nature. So that's over at wildmuskoka.com. The second one I wanted to mention is a really fun course I'm going to be working on a lot over the next couple of months, but it's already live because I created it last year. And it's an online course on how to grow your own edible and medicinal mushrooms. So that's super exciting. And what basically last year I created a course specific to growing them on logs, as well as understanding the phenomenal role of mushroom ecology. So those videos are all recorded and they're already up online. And I've got a whole bunch of ideas about making the course like 10 times better. And I'm going to be filming and working on that all summer long. But I'm offering that course for half price right now to kind of help fund the creation of part 2 of the course. So if you're interested in growing your own mushrooms or learning more about mushroom ecology, there'll be a little bit on there on wild foraging as well. Then you can go to my website, chrisoutdoors.ca/courses. And you can sign up for there for half price right now. It's only, I think it's $24.99 right now, and the price will be doubling once I finish it, but you'll get access to all of the additional modules as I put it together. And I'm trying this as a bit of an experiment to kind of sustainably fund the creation of the second half of the course. So that's another way that you can support my work while actually growing your own skills. And then the third one I want to mention right now is a course that I created that's called Nature's Language. And it's all about reading all of the signs of nature. So reading the tracks, interpreting the weather, knowing what the birds are saying to each other, basically reading the story that's written in the language of nature. And I'm going to share a short video right now. It's literally less than a minute. That yeah, a bit of a little kind of teaser trailer we made for the course. So just give me a second here. I'm going to share my screen. And I'll hit play. There is a language in nature, one that carries essential information that allows animals, birds, plants, fungi, humans, and all the other elements of life to communicate in harmony and as a healthy ecosystem. There is a pathway to begin to relearn this ancient and almost forgotten language, to again know when the birds are warning you of a predator in the far distance, or the footprints left behind by an animal tell you of the intricacies of a story that happened while you weren't even there. So I'd like to invite you on this 6-week adventure in learning to read the forgotten language of nature and the story left behind in the animal tracks.
Chris, your sound isn't working.
Hold on. How about now? You got me now?
Yep.
Did you
We
get
can
did
hear
the video
ya.
sound come through?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. That's funny. I paused my microphone so that you wouldn't get like a double feedback of the video on my microphone. So here, let's go that again. So anyways, Nature's Language is a course that I created on reading and interpreting the signs of nature. And if you're interested in going on that journey with me, you can also go to the chrisoutdoors.ca/courses to check that out. And if you enter the coupon code TRACKS, 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 you'll get 20% off of that course. And one thing I just want to mention, you'll notice I tried to stop the video right at the end there because it came up with a logo that actually said Nature's Forgotten Language. And we've actually changed the name of that course, which is part of me. You know, one of the themes of tonight was around this concept of reconciliation. And I got some really good feedback actually from somebody that's on the call tonight. And I don't have their permission to give their name. So if you're okay with me sharing your name, you could mention me. You probably know who you are. You could send me a private message, but I'll just share someone on the call tonight actually gave me some real interesting feedback to say that, you know, Chris, I think I know what you mean when you call this course Nature's Forgotten Language. But for many peoples of this land, particularly many First Nations people, this language wasn't actually forgotten by us. It was actually stolen. And that there's actually a lot of trauma that's been around that and a lot of healing that needs to be done. So that was actually a really good learning curve for me and a good kind of eye opener and awareness piece. So we actually decided to, in respect of some of the true history of this country and relationships with First Nations people, we've actually decided to rename the course. We're in the process of rebranding it right now. So I just wanted to share that little piece as well. So what we're going to do right now, we're just going to take 5 minutes right now and take a little bit of a break so we don't have to spend too much time staring at a screen. And what I would invite you to do is during this 5 minutes, for at least like 1 minute of it, to stick your head outside and take a breath of fresh air, or maybe even crack a window. Take in the smells, take in the feel of that breeze, and then we're going to come back together and we'll dive into part 2 of our night with Brandy. So yeah, we'll take 5 minutes, folks, and we'll be back at, let's say it's going to be 8:54 that we're going to get back together. And welcome everybody back right now. There's so many places I'd love to go with this conversation and probably not enough time to do it all. I feel like we could probably make this an all day long workshop here, but let's we'll do an introduction to a few things. I mean, my hope is that maybe there's some takeaways for folks to go home with, that maybe they have some ideas and concepts expanded upon for themselves. And I'm very open to where you want to go with this conversation, Brandy. But maybe since I said I was going to do it, for those that are unfamiliar with it, what does it mean that you guys are living permaculture out on our eco-village? You know, could you give us, and I know that could be the entire talk, so could you give us like a real, what does permaculture mean to you? And maybe even more so, what does living permaculture mean to you as a starting point here?
It's always that quintessential question. What does permaculture mean? How do you define it? And hopefully you've tripped across the idea that permaculture, by its very renegade nature, doesn't want to be defined specifically. It's kind of that ultra democratized way of being in the world where each of us probably carry our own definition. So I'm going to tell you mine, because I have always gleaned on this idea that human systems and natural systems and permaculture come together in the most interconnected way, and that we literally design our lives that way again, because probably they always were interconnected, but now we actually have to put some work and effort into redesigning them to that connection with the least harmful impact. And so when we describe living permaculture as a way of being throughout a day, throughout a season, throughout our life, actually being with the principles of permaculture design and the ethics. So, you know how some people have a vision and a mission statement for their life? I kind of think about it in a similar way. There is many times, and I think I said this morning something to my child about fair share. And we were talking about how parents taught people to cut the cookie in half, and the person who cut it got to do that part, and then the other person got to choose which half they wanted. And I started teaching permaculture in that moment. Again, just had to bring in the fair share ethic. But if everything in our lives ran past those ethics, fair share, people care, and earth care, and we really like resonated for a moment, is this what is needing to happen right now as a little checkpoint before we advance to the next activity of our day? I wonder how the world would change if we lived our ethics, if we were living permaculture. And then there is the principles. And I have raised my kids where they actually kind of sing back to me something where we're doing something, and my child wants me to carry something back on the way to across the space we live in. And she will say, one effort, many outcomes. In other words, carry my thing for me while you're going there. So it becomes kind of a game if you live your life that way. And if you look at all the principles of permaculture design, how does everything I put my hand to actually create that happening? So beyond a concept, definitely beyond a way to grow food only as a food security or food sustainability plan, how does permaculture design become my my in-breath and my exhale? How does it, from cradle to grave, have one effort be many outcomes? How do I work smarter, not harder? How do I turn waste to resource? All of those applications of those principles. Steve and I were talking today in the kitchen about how do you permaculturalize your kitchen? So I've made it a verb, not just a static thing, but permaculturalize our lives. So everything we do. Can you imagine writing policy for your organization and incorporating your documents with permaculture principles as your mandate for writing line by line? We actually call that fun here. We kind of geek out on that. Well, I'll own that I do. Not everybody does here. But suddenly, if you start to look at where that can be integrated into everywhere in life, then literally everything is connected. So I would say it's living in nature connection. It's living in stewardship of life in general. And the three themes that you have, Chris, with food security and really understanding food systems, wild and domesticated, all those elements of what you're describing all becomes part of that mechanism that is not mechanized. And people say, oh, it's so complicated to live your life that way. I just really want my life to be simple. And then I wonder, like, how many times do we walk into the forest and say, this forest is just so simple. There's hardly anything going on here. There's only 6 steps to it, and someone wrote a manual, and that feels very comfortable for me. So I think everything in life is very complex, but I do think it is simple in the sense that there is very simple laws of nature that regulate things. And those are very topsy-turvy right now. And we are in certainly uncertain times where we thought we could kind of predict some things, and maybe that's not so much right now. It's all the more resilience building to actually be living permaculture, when whether it's emergency planning or you literally just don't know what's going to come tomorrow, there is a ability to bounce back into the whole system if you're living within your system. And that occurs to some people, perhaps if you live in a small restricted space in some way, that maybe your ecosystem's not very big. But I would invite us to see that our ecosystem is the entire planet. So I don't limit myself by walls and built environments when I talk about that. Hopefully that's a good explanation.
Sure. Yeah. I always love hearing how different people answer that. And it's cool that you actually reference the kind of themes that we have there, because I've actually, I haven't really necessarily thought of the theme of this being permaculture or are those topics on their own being permaculture outside of the food security one, but it very much is. And when I think about how we've been trying to live permaculture over on our homestead over here, it very much incorporates that. I mean, there's a self-reliance component, which is, on one hand, it is about ourselves and providing for our own needs when times potentially get rough or when we don't know what's around the next corner. And I can tell you during COVID times, we're so thankful to be able to produce so much food and to really not have to leave the homestead much and be provided for the land. But there's also a stewardship component of it as well, in that we're able to reduce our fossil fuel intake. We're not bringing in fertilizers. And a big part of what we've done with the food systems is trying to design it so like every system, and this is kind of a little bit of, I guess, me going into my definition of permaculture, is by design, every system that we put into place feeds into another system, so that there's ideally no to little waste, or the waste becomes what something else needs to kind of grow. And you can think about that from a food perspective, but you can also think about it from a stewardship perspective, because we're lessening our impact on the land. And then you can also think about it from a social stewardship perspective. And one thing that we've been actually trying to incorporate more into our permaculture homestead the last couple of years is like, well, what if we were to actually grow excess of food for some of the older folks that we know in our area that aren't able to garden anymore? And just last night, we took a bunch of our eggs and some of our excess over to the folks across the street that actually used to love gardening when they were growing up, and are just getting to the point where it's they just don't quite have the energy or the oomph for it anymore. And we ended up having this beautiful long conversation, distanced out on the porch. And I see that actually as an extension of permaculture in and of itself. The relationships that we begin to forge through food and through self-reliance and through kind of making all of these systems linked to each other. So there's just a little bit of thought on what I am, or even like the way that we tend the leeks when we're out on the land, to me is kind of thinking about permaculture. Why don't we bridge from there into this idea of, well, maybe actually here's another definition question for tonight: ECOVILLAGE. What the heck does ECOVILLAGE mean? And I'm sure there's different definitions of that as well. What does ECOVILLAGE mean? And this idea of revillaging that you're talking about. And maybe there's two questions there. It's like, cool, what does our ECOVILLAGE mean at our ECOVILLAGE? And then what does revillaging mean for the people that are watching tonight as maybe a permaculture principle or system that we could be thinking about to build community in these challenging and interesting times?
I just put the permaculture principles link into the chat there, if that helps folks as well. That's not a familiar conversation. We joked, Chris, before this, that maybe we need a glossary of all the terms that I often use just for fun. But I would start with the idea of eco-village as a definition that's actually part of a global movement. So our eco-village is actually an acronym that is OUR. And I want to invite you to the idea that there's 10,000 eco-villages and intentional communities on the planet right now. It's growing fast. The Federation for Intentional Communities and the Global Eco-Village Network says there's an 80% increase in inquiry since the pandemic began. So I think there's something that is starting to awaken in each of us that realizes we need each other. That as we maybe are in isolation, or people in quarantine, or we're losing people, our connectivity as we've been distanced becomes all the more valuable. And for some people, we are 1, 2, even 3 generations removed from our village culture. Truth being, all of our families came from a lineage of villages once upon a time, no matter what background we have. And there's many people who are still villagers that are born and raised down their lineage. And there's whole countries that are very much more robust in their villaging abilities. So we often talk about revillaging for people that are tapping back into DNA of like, this was always what made sense. Mutually resourcing, coming together with interdependent models of sharing and collaborating. And potentially when you look at things like the Global Eco-Village Network, or gen.org, if you want to find your way in through there, and you can find eco-villages around the world, you'll see that this movement has been, as long as time to hold on to what was always traditional knowledge once upon a time. So it's this funny thing about reinventing things that were always there. Permaculture is based in a deep understanding of knowledge keepers that went back since the dawn of time, and it was oral tradition once upon a time. Now we have to take courses and come on Zoom calls. And I want to laugh about something because I was recalling a filmmaker who was here a couple of years ago, and I was just talking about this the other day, so I want to say it again. This whole thing that we're learning together, and the importance of how places like our eco-village with 10,000 learners coming through a year historically until the pandemic hit. And I must say, we're closed now. We're like 100% at a loss. But before that, there's this huge, great incline of us realizing we need to skill up, we need to learn, we need to figure out how to live more resiliently and live in deeper relationship together. The least sustainable element of all the quadrants or dimensions, as we call them in eco-village design, which is kind of like a second part to permaculture design, is the human element. The human dimension. We haven't quite figured out how to get through our conflictual and interpersonal challenge. The economic, the ecological, and dare we say the worldview dimensions are all available to us. And probably as human beings, we actually have the skills and resources to easily take on those three dimensions. But the fourth dimension being the human dimension, as we note from, well, perhaps breakdown in relationship and the obvious of personal, interpersonal, family, neighbors, towns, countries, and the globe, we haven't mastered that level of sustainability yet, the human interpersonal sustainability. So when we're talking about eco-village design, here I'd like to say we've always been kind of like just disguised as a human transformation space where we run permaculture courses, natural building courses. There's teachers who used to come from all over the world and teach whatever their incredible contribution would be. And over time, people would get here, and a majority of a group of people would all come to acknowledge that part of the reason they were there was to learn how to change their way of being in the world and to change their life. And for each one of us to take on that personal responsibility, it's kind of fun. It's embedded in the name OUR. So when you leave this call tonight and you say, oh, I was listening to that person from our eco-village, you'll thoroughly confuse somebody because they'll wonder why it's your eco-village. But it's this idea that our responsibility, our children, our planet, that it is intrinsically our responsibility to take on its, and it can like quickly take the Y off the front of your and make it our, and play with this idea of ownership. So back to the stewardship aspect, Chris, do we really own the land? Do we own the water? Do we own the air? And is it ours or is it ours? And so OUR is actually an acronym. It stands for One United Resource. And that somehow being in it together is how we're going to make that difference. So people really do come to places like this and declare that they're changed, that something happens. And we do a lot of space holding for people in very distinctly different cultural ways of being than you might imagine. Who is an eco-villager? A couple of years ago in a course, I think it was about 6 years ago now, was like the quintessential moment of, oh, we have a doctor, a lawyer, and a candlestick maker all in the course. And so there's no real who shows up. It's a great thing to see that everyone is starting to show up to the party and take on changing things in the world. gaining skills, new ways of seeing things, new knowledge bases. And eco-villages are as unique and different any place in the world as the people or that particular grouping that are there. But we share in common being human scale efforts towards the most integrated permaculture lifestyle. And then we link with each village to village around the world.
That was wonderful. I've got a couple kind of questions, I guess, kind of coming out of that. One part that I just actually really connected with that I just wanted to acknowledge there that I thought was really beautifully said is, you know, people show up for a permaculture course and they show up to build a, you know, a cob building, but really it's about, you know, personal transformation is actually why they're there. And, you know, just to share a similar story, you know, when I first started teaching wilderness survival, I was actually all passionate about teaching wilderness survival. Like I wanted to teach people how to live off the land. I wanted to live off the land. And it was pretty quickly I realized, you know, the majority of people were actually showing up because they were seeking something deeper. And it was internal transformation, and it was relationship with people and the land in a deep way. And that was like a big like light bulb moment in my life, being like, oh my goodness. And that's when it was like, wow, this is actually about healing. This work, whether it's tracking wildlife and learning about birds, or whether it's gardening or lighting a fire by rubbing sticks together, it's actually about transformation and relationship with the land. So I thought that was really, really beautiful to see that as an underlying thread there, because I think that's such important medicine for the time. You know, and the other part that I just want to highlight, and I'm curious if you've got some thoughts on this. So this is kind of a twofold question, and then I'm going to share, after you answer this one, I'll share a couple of the questions in the chat because a few people are mentioning stuff in there. You know, you had kind of mentioned, you know, the economics, the environment, the food part. You know, we probably actually already have the skill sets for that. The knowledge is probably there, which I totally agree. And it seems to be this social piece that's holding us back maybe from reaching goals sometimes, or to living in that more balanced way. And it's one of my biggest concerns with where the world is at right now, is just seeing this polarization and this social divide that's kind of starting to happen, even amongst my own circles of friends, you know, that I actually thought were relatively aligned. And now we're seeing like vaccine versus anti-vaccine, and, you know, this versus that. And I'm seeing so much of it right now. So I guess where I want to go with this question, let me just kind of think about it a little bit there. I'm going to share one little other piece and then put that question in. Is that your idea that kind of like we talked about, or you shared, that permaculture for you was actually about like kind of living by principles. And something that's changed from my relationship with you, I used to think of EcoVillage as this place that you go and live, where a bunch of people were living in, you know, communally on the land, which sure, that's one variation, but I'm realizing that eco-villages are actually more of a set of relationship or principles that guide relationships as well. And that we can actually think about our urban block as an eco-village, or our entire city. And really that's one small eco-village in that greater eco-village that you had. So I guess my question is, knowing where the kind of social fabric is right now and all of the tensions and the social divide, how could people think about what revillaging maybe looks like in their own life, in their own backyard, if they're not going to come and live in an intentional community? And maybe that's how you would separate it up. There's an intentional community, which is one version of an eco-village, but the eco-village could be the apartment building they're living in. Are you kind of following me? I hope that's not too broad, but what does it look like? What are some actual tools that people can go with around revillaging locally? And maybe you can speak to this kind of divide and developing tool sets to deal with this kind of social fragmentation we're feeling.
You know, if I could write a book right now about what your question was, it would be called Living Like Your Life Depends on It. and kind of play with that idea of really being alive like my life depends on it. And it's a good kind of play on words, but it's something real about designing our life a certain way. And I have this hopeful silver lining of these days of chaos, that it does create the opportunity for us to each design our life in a particular way. So eco-villages, I want to just say, had be not only whatever we make them, but they're large, they're small, they're urban, they're rural. One of my most favorite eco-villages, and Lois Arkin, a favorite person, is the founder of the Los Angeles Eco-Village, right downtown East End, LA, right in like Rodney King hugely impacted community of LA. They built an eco-village. They repurposed a whole bunch of tenement housing, bought a 4-block square. In the center of it, started raising more food than I've ever seen an urban landscape pull off. And there's something very curious. The day I showed up there on a speaking engagement, there's Lois Arkin, who is quite senior nowadays, standing in the middle of the street, waving at people, ushering them along. The streets are all painted with doves on the middle of the street, not just on the sidewalk, but on the street. It's a placemaking project all around the village that spreads out on the streets. And if you research there a little bit, you'll see that they've dropped the crime rate substantially right down on East End. Like this was riot zone in when they started doing this, and it's had quite an impact. So how do we want to design our lives? And now living like our life depends on it all the more with the crazy set of circumstances we're in this global pandemic. The obviousness of revillaging by creating pods with neighbors and teaming up and mutually, I mean, people are doing this all over, where only one person's going for supplies and getting them for everybody. If everybody was in a bubble together, like here at our eco-village, that's very easy. We could have, 75 of us if we wanted to here on site and really not have to ever go out and wear a mask if we're not really interfacing as much. And we're within the restrictions we're in. We're quite comfortable to walk around. We don't have to think about going down the street with all the kind of things that are going on in the world right now. How can we design our lives within the limitations and opportunities with the resources and what appears to be something not useful and turn it into something useful, and all those principles again to revillage, where perhaps this pandemic has really brought up this deep sense in all of us of belonging and connection, and suddenly starting to reweave that interbeing place. Like in revillaging, we each have a part to play. We each become an important and an integral person in our community. It doesn't matter how young or old or able or less able, but we each bring something to. Did I mute at one point?
I think you muted just for a second there, but you're back. I don't think it missed much.
Okay. Yeah, so I noticed a question in the chat around using nonviolent communication. I want to address that. How do we revillage? How do we move into this, one thing of language, but how is that a way of life? And what has become very much my whole 360 right now is restorative justice. The idea that it is just us, that it's an old story in reconciliation to keep blaming myself or blaming someone else or blaming the government or blaming my parents or finding someone outside me that can remove me from feeling that it's me that did this, or I'm having to accept this, or whatever I'm uncomfortable with or is super painful, and kind of projecting it out somewhere else. That restoring justice and having it become just us that is going to make the change and the difference in the world has really become a full opportunity around here at our eco-village. We have always had a deep relationship with the Cowichan Nation and the elders of the peoples whose territories and lands our eco-village resides on. In fact, one of our larger moves now as the pandemic has unfolded is to look at how we can do a land back and have our eco-village move back towards the peoples whose territory this really is. And as a gathering space for restorative justice one day and reconciliation work. And reconciliation again with ourselves, each other, and reconciliation with the land. And all the peoples, Quialco, one of the elders has just been in a coma for on and off and very ill for 4 months. And he was on life support. And when he came back, because he passed over many times, he said, I was told to come back here. And the reason I'm coming back here is to fully live into restorative justice. And there's something bubbling up around here, but nonviolent communication taken to the largest degree is as not only the way of interbeing, but it's actually taking time and space and going to the whole ecosystem to restore social justice, environmental justice. It's often used in the criminal justice system. And this is even trying to pull out and decolonize away from those kind of institutional levels and trying to create community justice. And that's up to all of us now, rather than looking for the right law or who's right about the law even these days, because law is to be argued. And you know, people even say, well, I would argue that it's this. And so what if we stopped arguing and actually noticed that arguing in the midst of a storm doesn't get us any safer? And there's a lot going on. If it's not the pandemic and then the economy, then we've got climate emergency. And so how do we pivot, not just in a pandemic sense, but how do we pivot our lives and live like our life depends on it into that level of reconciliation? So stay tuned this year. There's something called Awaken the Peacemaker that we're working on. And I think all of us are being called in the midst of all the conflict that's flying in the world and the incredible levels of violence erupting to really realize when something presents, it's also asking for a healing place. Or it's asking, the problem is the solution, we say in permaculture. So if the really not great is there, what is the antidote or what's the vaccine for that level of violence? And how do we step into becoming peacemakers, each in our own right, and trying to move past the social construct we've been in, both in literally revillaging and in a social interpersonal way as well.
You know, something that hit me really, really strong in that there, Brandy, and it's actually reminding me a couple of things I've heard mentors, two different mentors of mine say, you know, living as though our life depends on it. You know, and I think about one mentor of mine that's a guy that influenced me quite a long time ago that said something to the nature of real consequences create real results. You know, and that really hit me really strong. And it was in context to wilderness survival. But he kind of said, you know, you're never really going to actually be proficient at survival if you don't actually put yourself in situations where there's real risk. And he wasn't necessarily saying go do that, but in some ways he was saying, you know, real risk is actually going to make you different than you are right now practicing this in this safe environment. And you know what that's bringing up for me right now is we're actually in a place where risk is actually real right now. And maybe we need to actually start acting as though that's the case. And I think I'm very guilty of that myself. And like, you know, I can be very just like focused on my little circle and the little things that I do and my little life here and my little bubble. And that's something I've always really admired about you is how kind of just all in you are when it comes to community and some of these big issues. And yeah, I don't know, I guess I'm just kind of acknowledging that in this moment. That maybe some of us need to take that risk a little bit more seriously and actually take a more all in step and feel that pressure if we're actually going to see real changes and get out of our comfort zone. You know, definitely around the topic of reconciliation, I'm realizing the need to step out of my comfort zone or else nothing really happens. You know, intellectually, it makes sense to me, but change doesn't actually happen unless I do things that are uncomfortable for me. And it's probably the same in relationships as well. What about, I want to dive more into the reconciliation topic there, but maybe just for like a quick little like summer resource as far as takeaway for people that want to explore like just how to communicate and listen better in those, if you want to step out of your comfort zone and into the conflict a little bit as though as your life depends on it, and communicate better in the wherever the villages that you're living in. Do you have like kind of some starting resources for people? Like, is there a book? Is there a series? Is there something to listen to? Are there some guiding principles? do you have anything there that would be helpful for people if they wanted to like go somewhere with tonight's talk in their own personal development?
You know, in the days of not being able to travel, in theory, I would say go travel around some eco-villages online. Just go see what is out there and see the fantastic ways that people are designing their lives in those examples. They're pretty dreamy, some of them. And I'm not going to propose that we think that they're nirvana. The eco-villages, any land share projects are usually hotbeds of the rub. Like I like to say, a bunch of edgy folks gets together and we all rub and bump up against each other until we polish ourselves. And hopefully we really shine through after all that polishing, but it's painful. It's relationships end and it's real life, but it's not that protected space that I've chosen anyway, where I can kind of control or maintain my relationships. Like, you know, when the work idea of, you know, you're not supposed to bring your personal life to work and you're not supposed to bring your work home to your family. And many years ago, when I became a therapist, I declared my personal, my professional, and my political would be one integrity, or I would not show up in a different environment until I could figure out how to be that. I don't know. I want to take your question in a way, Chris, and turn us towards some specific resources. Like I think of things like just simple heart circles, listening circles. Some people call them the way of counsel training. That's quite frequently a circle format that's in eco-villages. There's many designs on that similar format. Decision making, though, is the tricky part. Human communication is completely flawed at the best of times. The idea that we're ever going to get to clarity is also like we're ever going to get to utopia right now. So putting this aside, the idea that we're, you know, I've spent 20 years working on legal documents and structuring, and whoever asked the question about land use zoning and creating precedent after precedent after precedent. And I can tell you, every one of those things can be argued down by a different court or a different policy or something. So there's nothing clear about written words or verbal words. It'll all get interpreted by us as human beings. So if we went to a different place of listening with decision making, I look at things like sociocracy. And if you want to look that up, it's kind of like a level of democracy that is engaged socialism and democracy into a people-centric decision-making that equalizes power more and shares decision-making. Much healthier, drives many people crazy. A lot of people don't want to come to meetings in the first place. And now you're actually going to invest more time in making a decision. That sometimes has people who are not fully relationship oriented on the run from group dynamics or revillaging. But the truth is, we're in a big decision making time right now. We could use all the decision making and relationship work in the world possible, no matter if, you know, someone in my village is in the UK right now or whatever. So that's another tool I would point to is sociocracy. The other thing I want to offer into anybody on here actually is that, and I think I put this in the chat somewhere, but we have a course called Awaken that actually has brought together restorative justice folks, elders, and different First Nations holders of this space, but with people in government. And there's a whole schwack of lawyers coming in. And that organization that is a Canadian charity is running it on land and online. But some people will be here in our space at our eco-village. And I've kind of jumped in with that team and co-creating that. But there's people from the Global Eco-Village Network creating it, folks from all over the world creating it. And restorative justice as a tool is something to track closely. There's something called the Little Book of Restorative Justice, just a simple, very skinny book. And you'll notice that there is restorative justice in classrooms, restorative justice in universities. And that little book is a little book of about 25 little books. And any of those will serve you. Any of those are the tools for tomorrow. If we're going to live into a certainly uncertain future, in my opinion, we need to restore justice in order to be peacemakers, in order to transform what we need in knowledge, skills, and self to go forward in this world and really listen in what is needed of us right now, what is being requested of human beings, and can we stand in with each other with that calling and with that opportunity.
You know, one thing that comes to mind for me is maybe a little baby step there too for folks, because you know I don't like uncomfortable situations, and my natural tendency is to just want to avoid conflict and to be, which is actually kind of a form of me being a peacemaker, but something I've actually been very intentionally working on. And this actually came out of some time that I spent with an elder up in Northern Ontario at a conference there that I was at. And speaking with one of the chiefs up there actually, and she was talking about just learning to be uncomfortable, learning to be comfortable with uncomfortableness. And that really struck a chord with me really strong. And she actually had kind of suggested to me is, you know what, if you're, and you know, that came out of watching her in some very uncomfortable situations with people and conversations during this conference, and me just kind of cringing. And she said, you know, what we're doing here is fairly intense, but you know, you could just look for little opportunities in your life with people that you maybe trust and have relationship with, where you could just push that edge a little bit and you know, and step into that uncomfortableness a little bit and just get comfortable with being uncomfortable and kind of work your way up. Because I do think, you know, that there is a need to be more comfortable with the uncomfortable in the healing of human relationships there. And then of course, being able to like truly listen in that and track our own emotions and our own triggers. So maybe that's a little baby step that folks could consider is, you know, if you're not able to dive into the big conversation or that's really intimidating, you know, where are just little spots in your life where you can step into being uncomfortable for a little bit and try and get a little bit more comfortable with it, knowing that you're doing it for a greater good. And maybe that's the driving force that actually pushes you there. We're kind of at the end of our talk here, and I would love to explore one more, well, kind of build on one more topic here, and it kind of relates to a couple of questions that I see coming up here. One, there's a great question. I apologize, I don't know the pronunciation of the name, but they said, you know, a question about permaculture as a buzzword. How could permaculture be related to or be a barrier to traditional ecological knowledge? So I'm sure that's a question that you've had before, and maybe you want to speak to that. But the one thing I'm really fascinated, and I think people could do and follow along with here, is this story that you folks have going on with, sorry, how do you say, is it the Qualicum First Nations out there?
The Cowlitson.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cowlitson First Nations. So what out at our eco-village right now, you know, they're engaged in this process that I imagine has a lot of edginess and uncomfortableness of actually saying, you know, one way to look at reconciliation is to actually take this land that we're holding in permaculture and actually offer it back to the traditional peoples of this land. And actually let them kind of guide in what they want to do it. And my understanding is this awakening process that you're talking about is one of the pieces there, and that it's not necessarily exactly clear where it's all going. And there probably is some uncomfortableness, but there's an opportunity for some of us to follow along in that journey and the work that's being done. Am I kind of summarizing that in a somewhat accurate way there, Brandy? And I believe you guys are doing kind of some free sessions and Q&As that'll have elders and various people kind of speaking to that. Am I summarizing that okay? Or
Yeah, actually, for those who are interested, on Saturday morning, and I believe it's on our website at our ecovillage.org, and it's on our Facebook page, is a really easy place to grab it. There is a free question and answer with Chief Justice Robert Yazzie and a team of people that come from an organization titled Life Comes From It. And they're an Indigenous foundation that funds restorative justice work in the United States. I don't know if somebody can grab that name, but Life Comes From It. And Chief Justice Robert Yazzie is a US government appointed Chief Justice. He's a Navajo elder who will be on the call. He's his way of the good way in Navajo. I cannot say the word in Dene language, but the good way, the good path is being matched with the great deeds conversation of the Cowichan Nation of here. And so Chief Justice Yazzie is trying to, all these guys are looking to be here this summer. Whether they'll make it over the border or not, we remain to be seen. But they're on a teaching contract to come here and hold space for what Judge Fairbanks, a Tlingit woman who is a US appointed judge, calls transformational justice. And she's really fun. And she said, we're going to get up to some good stuff this summer. And I'm like, well, let's see what that's going to look like. But, you know, whether you want to come and just listen to and ask questions of folks on that team, or if you want to drop in for the bigger 4 months of the summer, or there's just Saturdays, or if you're looking for information on rezoning work, and there's a bunch of us who consult around working with precedent policy work, having things be lawful in Canada. How do you have multiple homes and multiple people on one set of land? How do you own land together? For 8 years, our EcoVillage had a lawyers team led by an environmental law facilitator that looked at land share projects in Canada and how to finance, own, and govern the commons. So that kind of stuff's available as well. If you want to find us and ask like much more specific questions around that, I saw some in the chat. Please just find us and say you were on Nature Calls call with Chris, and that email will get fired towards me probably to answer.
Awesome, Brandy. Maybe Sherry Ann, could you just share the link to the free series there for folks that are interested in this kind of conversation here? And coming back, maybe we'll leave this as the last kind of question and wrap up on it there. So Sherry Ann, just share that's where you can get involved with this the free speak talk and the question and answer around this process that they're going through. You know, it might be actually, maybe that is a first step, because I'd imagine there might be some uncomfortable moments that come up in that. And it's an opportunity to kind of sit as an observer and feel it and actually see how people role model and how people go through it and address it. So there's a thought there. Do you, I don't want to push off that one question that was kind of, I don't know if it was a challenge to the concept of permaculture, but they brought up the one I asked that I don't know if I can find it there. Just around whether permaculture could be a barrier to traditional Indigenous knowledge. And my thought is, and again, I'm curious your thought on this, that the work that you folks are doing out there with the Cowichan and this Awaken experience is trying to actually break down the barriers that maybe have existed in some forms of permaculture. But do you have a general thought on that question in general, Brandy?
Yeah, I think it's, we all need to be a stand for decolonizing anything that starts institutionalizing itself, and permaculture has started to take its own kind of institutionalizing. I remember being at a teacher gathering and people started talking about in the industry, and I'm like, wait, no, that was never supposed to be where we went. This is not an industry. And as soon as we start commodifying knowledge in that way and it becomes for sale, like there's times we sit in back rooms with teachers and talk about edutainment and you know, not willing to be for sale. And think about how so far back before someone like me or anyone here on this call saying that, there's all the knowledge keepers that also have to be feeling that way, like, where was this hijacked? This is all comes from traditional knowledge. The cycles and ways of being inherently interconnected in the natural world isn't something new. And now it's a university degree. This is as old as time. This is a way of being that was what there was until other systems started to overlay and take us into unnatural ways of being. So we need to each be a stand for traditional knowledge. And I think that was you, Guru, but tech as a way to honor all those who came before us and all those who know far more than we do. And I think the two biggest skills in these days is to suspend being right. And that's a lot to do with restoring justice. To not have an answer and to not be right. When you're a designer and your whole life is on kind of like reading the space, but to not know the answer that's being given to me before it arrives. And to the second part is to always stay in a spirit of inquiry. If I am willing to not know what I don't know at all times, and then always be on the other foot, stepping into the possibility of what might arrive and meeting it with a represence place of a new awareness and empty presence into, whoa, never saw that at all coming. That is amazing. So those are two heightened levels of skill right now, I think, that we need. And they really are nature awareness skills. They really are skills of stewardship. That is an honorable life, and to practice that. And we're all trying. And it's not about having this down pat, but it's about upping ourselves. And in the days when we're not doing well, because there's a lot of those days these days, but here the elders teach us, on a day when it's not good for someone, then the community stands up that person. In the days when you fall into your knees and you cannot, and or you do something that you're so unhappy with yourself about, then somebody else will stand you up. And when you think you can't hold yourself, we need each other. We need each other to be in that inquiry and that not having it figured out or not knowing. And we need to remind each other how to be with that and how to practice that. So I want to thank you for creating this juicy conversation, Chris, and everybody here.
I love it, Brandy. And those are beautiful words to close on. I think we can just leave it there. So thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm really excited to follow along with the project out west. And I don't know if project's even the right word. It's jumping into the fire and living life and doing the work. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for sharing with us tonight. And yeah, we'll be in touch soon. So take care, everybody.
Halkaminam language is Haichka. Thank you from us here to you.
And I'll just let folks know, next week we have another amazing guest, Dan Gardoki, who's been one of my most influential mentors in the realm of nature connection and awareness. Phenomenal birder, tracker, just all around great guy, role model. So he'll be with us next Thursday, same time. So stick around for that one. Tell your friends, and thanks everybody. Have a fantastic night. Until we meet again.